Daniel in the Lion's Den is a powerful story of faith, courage, and divine protection, illustrating how Daniel's unwavering trust in God saved him from a seemingly inescapable death. The narrative found in the book of Daniel chapter 6 opens with Daniel, a high-ranking official in the Medo-Persian Empire under King Darius. His exceptional character, wisdom, and integrity caused him to stand out among his peers, which led to jealousy among the other satraps and administrators. They conspired to find a way to remove him from his influential position, but because of his flawless conduct, they could find no grounds for accusing him of wrongdoing. Instead, they decided to exploit his devotion to God, knowing that his faithfulness was unwavering. In their scheme, the conspirators convinced King Darius to issue a decree that for 30 days, no one in the kingdom could pray to any god or man except the king himself. The punishment for disobedience was to be thrown into a den of lions, a brutal and certain death sentence. This decree was particularly diabolical because they knew Daniel would continue to pray to the God of Israel, no matter the consequence. King Darius, unaware of the plot's true intent, signed the decree, sealing Daniel's fate. Daniel, as expected, remained steadfast in his faith. Despite knowing about the decree, he went to his house, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and knelt to pray 3 times a day, as was his custom. His loyalty to God was paramount, and he did not allow fear of the king's law to interfere with his spiritual discipline. The conspirators, having anticipated Daniel's actions, quickly reported his disobedience to the king. Darius, who valued Daniel, was deeply troubled upon hearing this news. He realized that he had been manipulated, but the laws of the Medes and Persians could not be altered, even by the king himself. Reluctantly, and despite his efforts to find a way to save Daniel, Darius was forced to carry out the punishment. Daniel was brought before the king, and though Darius expressed hope that Daniel's God would save him, he had no choice but to have Daniel cast into the den of lions. A stone was rolled over the entrance, and the king sealed it with his own ring, ensuring that no one could rescue Daniel. That night, Darius was restless, unable to eat or sleep as he feared for Daniel's fate. Early the next morning, he hurried to the lion's den and called out to Daniel, hoping against hope that he had survived. Miraculously, Daniel answered the king, explaining that God had sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths, and they had not harmed him. Daniel attributed his deliverance to his innocence before God and to the fact that he had done no wrong before the king. Overwhelmed with relief and amazement, Darius ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den, and incredibly there was not a scratch on him, for he had trusted in his God. The king then commanded that the men who had falsely accused Daniel, along with their families, be thrown into the lion's den. Unlike Daniel, they did not survive. The lions overpowered them before they even hit the floor of the den. This drastic turn of events highlighted the divine protection Daniel had received and the judgment that fell upon the wicked. Darius, moved by this display of God's power, issued a decree to the entire kingdom, commanding that all people fear and revere the God of Daniel. He praised God as the living God who endures forever, whose kingdom will never be destroyed, and whose dominion will never end. The king acknowledged that Daniel's God performed signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, and that he had saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Daniel's survival in the lion's den is not only a testament to the power of faith, but also a lesson about God's sovereignty and protection. The lions, which symbolize the terrifying forces that sought to destroy Daniel, were powerless before the angel of the Lord. Daniel's story encourages believers to remain faithful to God, even when faced with impossible circumstances. His trust in God was absolute, and he did not allow the threat of death to compromise his spiritual convictions. The outcome of his trial serves as a reminder that God is always in control, even when the situation seems hopeless from a human perspective. The faith Daniel demonstrated was rooted in a lifetime of commitment to God. From his youth, when he refused to eat the king's food in Babylon, to his interpretations of dreams and visions that foretold the future, Daniel consistently lived out his belief in the sovereignty of God. His faithfulness was not limited to public displays of piety, but was grounded in a deep personal relationship with God. This relationship gave him the strength to face the lions with calm assurance, knowing that his life was in God's hands. Furthermore, Daniel's story speaks to the importance of prayer. Daniel prayed 3 times a day, maintaining a regular schedule of communication with God. Prayer was not just an act of devotion for Daniel, it was a lifeline, a source of strength, and a means by which he aligned himself with God's will. In a world where pressures and challenges abound, Daniel's commitment to prayer serves as a model for believers today. His prayers were not merely petitions for help, but acts of worship and surrender to God's sovereignty. This daily rhythm of prayer fortified him for the challenges he would face, including the most life-threatening trial of all, his encounter with the lions. King Darius's reaction to Daniel's deliverance is also significant. While the king initially saw himself as the most powerful figure in the kingdom, his encounter with Daniel's God led him to recognize a higher authority. His decree that all people in the kingdom should honor the God of Daniel underscores the far-reaching impact of Daniel's faithfulness. Through Daniel's trial, the God of Israel was made known to an entire empire. Darius's proclamation reveals that God's protection of Daniel was not just about saving one man. It was a demonstration of divine power that would influence an entire nation. The lions, symbols of destruction and fear, were subdued in the presence of divine intervention. This aspect of the story invites reflection on the symbolic lions that believers may face in their own lives, circumstances or challenges that seem insurmountable. Daniel's example shows that faith in God can turn even the most dangerous situations into opportunities for God's glory to be revealed. His deliverance serves as a metaphor for how God is able to shut the mouths of the lions in our lives, protecting us from harm and providing us with peace in the midst of turmoil. Moreover, the story of Daniel in the lion's den illustrates the theme of justice. Those who sought Daniel's downfall were ultimately destroyed by the very danger they had planned for him. This reversal of fate is a recurring theme in biblical narratives, where God intervenes to bring justice for his faithful servants. The conspirators' plot, motivated by envy and malice, was overturned by God's justice, demonstrating that while evil may seem to prevail for a time, it is ultimately powerless against God's righteousness. The lions, which were meant to be agents of destruction for Daniel, became instruments of judgment for his enemies. Daniel's experience also points to the broader theme of God's protection of his people throughout the scriptures. Just as he protected Daniel in the lion's den, God protected Noah in the flood, Moses from Pharaoh's wrath, and the Israelites in the wilderness. These stories collectively affirm the biblical teaching that God is a refuge for his people, a shield against danger, and a deliverer in times of trouble. Daniel's faith was not based on a naive belief that everything would always go well for him. Rather, it was grounded in the understanding that God is faithful to his promises, regardless of the outcome. Even if Daniel had not been delivered from the lions, his faith would have remained intact, for his trust was in God's eternal plan. The lion's den can also be viewed as a test of faith. Daniel's willingness to face the lions rather than abandon his prayer life was a profound demonstration of his trust in God. His faith was not a passive belief, but an active choice to obey God, even at great personal risk. This active faith is what sustained him in the face of death and is what God honored by delivering him from harm. Daniel's story challenges believers to consider the depth of their own faith and to reflect on how they respond when their faith is tested. Do they, like Daniel, remain steadfast in their trust in God, or are they swayed by fear and the pressures of the world? The story also emphasizes that faithfulness to God does not guarantee an easy or trouble-free life. Daniel was a man of integrity and devotion, yet he still faced persecution and danger. His faith did not shield him from the schemes of his enemies, but it did provide him with the strength to endure those trials. The lion's den was a place of testing, but it also became a place of victory, as God turned a situation of apparent defeat into one of triumph. Daniel's story reminds believers that while trials and challenges are inevitable, they are also opportunities for God's power to be displayed in their lives. In addition to being a story of personal faith, Daniel in the lion's den has broader implications for understanding the nature of God's kingdom. Throughout the book of Daniel, there is a recurring theme of kingdoms rising and falling, with God's kingdom standing above them all. The lion's den episode is a microcosm of this larger theme. While the earthly king Darius was bound by the laws of his empire, God was not constrained by any human law. God's intervention in the lion's den demonstrated that his authority surpasses that of any earthly ruler. God's kingdom, as revealed through Daniel's deliverance, is portrayed as eternal, unshakable, and superior to any earthly dominion. While Darius, a powerful king, found himself helpless under the constraints of his own law, God was free to act according to his will, demonstrating his absolute sovereignty. This sovereignty of God is a theme that permeates the book of Daniel, especially in contrast to the temporal nature of human kingdoms. Empires rise and fall, laws change, and rulers come and go. But God's kingdom is unchanging and everlasting. Daniel's experience in the lion's den was a dramatic illustration of this divine truth. Furthermore, Daniel's deliverance was not merely for his sake, but it had a profound ripple effect on the entire kingdom. When Darius saw that God had protected Daniel, he recognized that Daniel's God was unlike any other deity. The decree that followed, commanding the entire kingdom to fear and honor the God of Daniel, was an acknowledgement of God's unmatched power and authority. It is important to note that this was not just a personal proclamation by the king, but a formal edict that would have been communicated throughout the vast Persian Empire. In this sense, Daniel's trial became a means by which God's name was magnified across an entire nation. What began as an attempt to destroy Daniel's faith ended with a public declaration of God's sovereignty. The episode also serves as a reminder that God's power is not limited to Israel. It extends over all the earth. This universal aspect of God's rule is critical to understanding the broader narrative of the Bible. The God of Israel is not merely a local deity confined to a particular people or place. He is the creator and sustainer of all things, ruling over every nation and every creature, including the fierce lions that were meant to kill Daniel. This truth, revealed through Daniel's story, foreshadows the future expansion of God's kingdom to all peoples, a theme that finds its ultimate fulfillment in the New Testament with the coming of Christ and the spreading of the gospel to the ends of the earth. Additionally, Daniel's unwavering faith in the face of death is a powerful testimony to the kind of relationship he had with God. His faith was not circumstantial or based on immediate outcomes. It was rooted in a deep understanding of God's character. Daniel knew that God could save him, but his faith was not contingent on that deliverance. This is evident in his calm acceptance of the punishment and his continued devotion to prayer, even when it meant risking his life. Such faith is not born in moments of crisis, but is cultivated over a lifetime of trust and obedience to God. Daniel's regular practice of prayer and his consistent faithfulness in small matters prepared him to face this great trial. His story encourages believers to nurture their faith daily so that when they face their own lion's dens, they too can stand firm in their trust in God. The lion's den experience also points to the broader biblical theme of suffering and persecution. Throughout history, God's people have faced trials and tribulations, often because of their faith. Daniel's story is one example among many where a believer is persecuted for their devotion to God. Yet, as Daniel's deliverance shows, God is with his people in the midst of their suffering. This theme is echoed in the New Testament, where Jesus promises his followers that they will face trials, but assures them that he has overcome the world. Daniel's story is a precursor to this greater promise, offering hope to all believers that no matter what dangers or persecutions they may face, God is present with them and will ultimately deliver them. Moreover, Daniel's story offers a profound lesson in integrity. Throughout his life, Daniel demonstrated impeccable character, which is why his enemies were forced to attack him based on his faith rather than his conduct. His integrity was so strong that even those who hated him could find no fault in his behavior. In a world where compromise and moral ambiguity often reign, Daniel's example is a powerful reminder of the importance of living a life of integrity. His faithfulness in both private and public life earned him the respect of kings and the favor of God. The story invites believers to reflect on their own lives and consider whether their faith and actions align, even when no one is watching. Another important dimension of the story is the role of divine justice. The conspirators who sought to destroy Daniel were ultimately the ones who faced destruction. Their scheme backfired, and they were thrown into the very den of lions that had been prepared for Daniel. This reversal of fortunes is a vivid illustration of God's justice, a recurring theme throughout Scripture. God sees the wickedness of human hearts and brings about justice in his perfect timing. For Daniel, this meant that his enemies were dealt with, not by his own hand, but by God's. The principle of divine justice is comforting for believers, as it assures them that even when evil seems to prevail, God is still in control, and he will bring justice to pass in his time. It's also significant that Daniel's deliverance came through the intervention of an angel. Throughout the Bible, angels often act as messengers and protectors of God's people. In this instance, the angel was sent to shut the mouths of the lions, demonstrating that God's protection is both personal and powerful. This angelic intervention highlights God's care for his faithful servants, even in the most perilous situations. The presence of the angel in the lion's den is a reminder that God's help often comes in ways that are beyond human understanding. While Daniel's situation appeared hopeless, God was at work behind the scenes, orchestrating his deliverance in a way that defied natural expectations. This aspect of the story challenges believers to trust that God is always working, even when they cannot see it, and that his protection extends beyond what is visible to the human eye. Daniel's experience in the lion's den also serves as a foreshadowing of future deliverance themes that run throughout Scripture. The image of a man being delivered from death by divine intervention mirrors other instances in the Bible where God rescues his people from seemingly hopeless situations. In the New Testament, this theme culminates in the resurrection of Jesus, where God delivers his Son from the ultimate den, death itself. Just as Daniel emerged unharmed from the lion's den, Christ rose from the grave, conquering sin and death. Daniel's story, therefore, can be seen as a prelude to the ultimate act of deliverance that God would accomplish through Jesus Christ, offering salvation not just from physical harm, but from eternal separation from God. Another layer to consider is the effect of Daniel's faithfulness on those around him, particularly King Darius. Before the events of the lion's den, Darius respected Daniel, but likely did not fully understand or acknowledge the power of Daniel's God. However, after witnessing Daniel's miraculous deliverance, Darius experienced a profound transformation. He went from being a king who enforced the worship of himself to a king who proclaimed the glory of the God of Israel to his entire kingdom. Daniel's faithfulness in the face of death had an evangelistic impact, as it revealed the power and reality of God to a pagan king and his people. This aspect of the story demonstrates how one person's steadfast faith can have far-reaching consequences, influencing not only individuals but entire communities and nations. This evangelistic element of the story also ties into the broader biblical theme of God's desire to make his name known among all nations. Throughout the Old Testament, God's dealings with Israel were not just for the benefit of his chosen people, but were meant to be a testimony to the surrounding nations of his power and grace. Daniel's deliverance was a means by which God's name was exalted in a foreign land, fulfilling the broader mission of bringing the knowledge of God to all people. This theme reaches its fullest expression in the New Testament, where the message of salvation through Christ is proclaimed to all nations. In this way, Daniel's experience in the lion's den serves as a precursor to the global mission of the gospel. The story of Daniel in the lion's den also raises important questions about the relationship between faith and politics. Daniel was a high-ranking official in the kingdom of Persia, serving faithfully under multiple pagan kings. Yet when his loyalty to God came into conflict with the demands of the state, Daniel did not waver. His story challenges believers to consider how they navigate their own responsibilities in secular systems while remaining true to their faith. Daniel's example shows that it is possible to serve in positions of influence and power without compromising one's commitment to God. However, it also highlights the reality that faithfulness to God may sometimes come at a great cost, as it did for Daniel when he was thrown into the lion's den. In addition to his political role, Daniel's position in the Persian Empire allowed him to be a witness to God's power before the most influential leaders of the time. His life shows that God places his people in strategic positions, not just for their benefit, but to fulfill his purposes. Daniel's influence in the courts of Babylon and Persia extended far beyond his personal advancement. It became a platform through which God's name was proclaimed. This principle can be applied to believers today, who are called to be witnesses for Christ in their workplaces, communities, and even in positions of power and influence. Like Daniel, they are called to live with integrity and faithfulness, trusting that God will use their lives for His glory, even in difficult circumstances. Finally, Daniel's story offers a message of hope for those who feel overwhelmed by the challenges of life. The lion's den represents a place of fear, danger, and uncertainty. Yet it was in that very place that God's power was most clearly displayed. Daniel's deliverance shows that God is not distant or indifferent to the struggles of His people. He is present with them in the midst of their trials. The lions that were meant to devour Daniel became a backdrop for God's miraculous intervention, turning a place of death into a place of deliverance. This transformation of the lion's den from a symbol of defeat into a symbol of victory is a powerful reminder that God can bring life out of even the darkest situations. For believers facing their own lion's den, Daniel's story is an assurance that God is able to deliver, sustain, and protect, no matter how dire the circumstances may appear.
Thanks for watching our latest videos by clicking on the video in the screen, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.